Captain Elias Stone stepped off the shuttle and onto the polished surface of the Xeris capital. His boots made a soft clink on the shimmering walkway as the alien city towered before him, sprawling across the horizon, with structures that bent and twisted in ways no human architect could imagine. This wasn't just another diplomatic mission. This was humanity's chance to prove its place in the vast, interconnected galaxy. But Elias felt the weight of the expectations pressing down on him as he made his way to the council chambers. The galaxy was not kind to humanity. His people had only just begun to establish themselves in the greater galactic community, and already there were whispers of humans being too weak, too fragile, to hold any real power. The alien races had long dismissed them, viewing Earthlings as little more than a curiosity. Some species looked at humans with contempt, others with pity, but none of them truly understood the strength that pulsed through their veins. Elias had always believed that if humanity could just be given a chance, they could rise to meet the challenges of the galaxy. But now, as he walked into the heart of the Xeris capital, Elias couldn't help but wonder if this opportunity would be different. The cold reception from the alien diplomats and the tight-lipped expressions of the various factions that had gathered to see him told him everything he needed to know. They expected failure. He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. He had a mission to complete. The Xeris were powerful, one of the dominant species in the galaxy. The Queen, Elira, ruled over the vast system with an iron grip, but she had recently been facing increasing unrest from rival factions. Her reign was in jeopardy, and her allies were few. Humanity's involvement could tip the scales in her favor, or it could mark their downfall. The council chamber was massive, its walls lined with alien symbols that Elias couldn't read. At the far end, a throne sat on a raised platform, the center of attention, and seated upon it was Queen Elira herself. Elias knew about her. The rumors surrounding her were impossible to ignore. The Xeris Queen was known for her sharp mind, her calculating demeanor, and her unmatched command of her people. She was not one to be trifled with. But Elias also knew that her reputation for strength came at a price. Elira had earned the distrust of many, and her enemies were circling closer by the day. As he approached the throne, Elias couldn't help but notice her appearance. Tall and imposing, her skin a shimmering silver blue that seemed to pulse with a faint light of its own. Her eyes, glowing with an unnatural intensity, met his with an unreadable expression. A calm, composed queen who looked at him with nothing short of disdain. "So, this is the human representative?" Her voice was smooth, but there was a sharp edge to it, like the bite of a blade cutting through the air. "I expected more." Elias felt the sting of her words, but he didn't flinch. He had been through much worse on Earth. His entire life had been spent proving himself against those who underestimated him. He straightened his back, meeting her gaze head on. "I'm not here to impress you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to help." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small, amused smile. "Help? A human, weak and fragile, offering help to an empire such as mine? How quaint." Elias could feel the judgment in her words, the undercurrent of superiority that laced every syllable. But he knew better than to react. He had seen this before. On Earth, it was no different. People who thought they were stronger, better, faster, those were the ones who were most vulnerable when the time came to adapt. "You may see me as weak," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "But my people have survived against every odd, and we're just getting started. I'm not here to tell you how to rule your empire, Queen Elira. I'm here to offer you something that you may not have considered. An alliance based on mutual respect, not fear." She studied him for a long moment, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Respect?" she mused.
"From a human? You are a curious one, Captain Elias Stone."
"But don't mistake your words for wisdom. You are not in a position to negotiate." Elias didn't back down. He knew that if he was going to succeed here, he couldn't show weakness, not to her, not to anyone in the room. "Then I suppose you've already made your decision about humanity." Alira's expression remained unreadable as she shifted slightly in her throne, her eyes never leaving him. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of unspoken tensions. Then, in a surprising move, she gestured for him to approach. "We will see, Captain Stone. We will see if your words have any merit." Elias stepped forward, but he knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Queen Alira had no intention of simply handing over her trust, not to a human. But he wasn't here to beg for it. He had a plan. One that could show her that humanity's strength lay not in their physical prowess, but in their resilience, their ingenuity, and their ability to adapt. These were traits the Xeris had yet to understand, and he intended to prove them wrong. For the next several hours, they engaged in a tense back and forth. Elias presented data about Earth's technological advancements, its growing influence across the stars, and the way humanity had managed to survive in a galaxy that had no place for them. Alira listened, her face impassive, her eyes never leaving him. There were moments when he felt like he was talking to a wall, but he kept going. Every word he spoke was aimed at breaking through that wall, showing her that there was value in humanity beyond what she could see on the surface. But it wasn't until the end of their conversation, when Alira stood to leave, that the first crack appeared in her armor. "You speak as though you know what you're doing," she said, her voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "The Xeris are ancient, our ways unshakable." "I know that," Elias replied, his voice low but confident. "But sometimes the old ways need to change. And maybe, just maybe, we can help you with that." For the first time since their meeting began, Alira didn't immediately dismiss him. Instead, she turned away, her sharp features softening ever so slightly. "We will see, Captain Stone, we will see." The words hung in the air as she walked away, leaving Elias standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made it through the first hurdle, but the real test was only just beginning. As Elias left the chamber, he couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of her game, a way to see if he was strong enough to earn her trust. But he had never been one to play by anyone else's rules. He would win her trust, but not through power, not through fear, through something far more dangerous: his human ability to outthink, outlast, and ultimately outmaneuver those who thought themselves superior. And when he returned to his quarters, staring out at the alien city sprawling below, he realized one thing. This wasn't just about peace. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a passing thought. It was a force to be reckoned with. The following days on Xeris were a blur of tense political maneuvering, quiet moments of reflection, and above all, the weight of responsibility that hung over Captain Elias Stone's shoulders. As the human representative, he had already made a mark with his words, but now it was time to show the alien queen that humanity had more to offer than empty promises. Elias spent long hours in the council chambers, discussing everything from trade agreements to cultural exchange. But each time, the room seemed to grow colder, the atmosphere more strained. The factions on Xeris, some loyal to Queen Alira, and others looking to usurp her power, watched him closely. They hadn't yet fully accepted humanity's presence in the galaxy, and most of them viewed Elias as an intruder, just another pawn in their game of thrones. Despite the tension, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Queen Alira than met the eye. Her beauty and power were undeniable, but it was the quiet moments between their conversations that intrigued him. She was calculating, a master of diplomacy in her own right, but there was something in the way she looked at him sometimes, something that seemed to acknowledge his resilience, his willingness to stand firm against her harsh judgments. But for all her outward strength, Elias could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. He knew that her throne was far from secure. Her enemies were everywhere, in the council and among her people, and their whispers grew louder by the day. Yet, despite everything, she still refused to back down. She held her ground, and in that, Elias found a strange sense of respect for her. She wasn't as invincible as she wanted everyone to believe. Beneath the sharp exterior, He could sense the weight of fear of losing everything, of watching her empire crumble. It was a fear that resonated with him, for he had seen it before in Earth's leaders, those who clung desperately to their power even as their people turned against them. One evening, after a particularly intense round of negotiations, Elias was summoned to Alira's private chambers. The palace, with its gleaming silver walls and towering spires, was both awe-inspiring and overwhelming. As he walked through the grand hallways, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of the ancient traditions that seemed to breathe in the very walls around him. This was a place of power, of ancient lineage, and yet, as he entered Alira's chambers, he felt the unmistakable tension in the air. Alira stood by the window, gazing out at the sprawling city below. Her back was straight, her posture regal, but there was something in the way she held herself that told Elias she was struggling to keep up the facade. "Captain Stone," she said, without turning around. "I trust you've been making yourself comfortable." Elias stood in the doorway, waiting for her to acknowledge him fully. When she finally did, her gaze met his, and for a moment, the walls between them seemed to crack. "I've been listening to the whispers," she continued, her voice softer now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I hear the voices of those who want to tear this empire apart, of those who would see me fall. I've been in this position before, at the edge, with enemies closing in on all sides." Elias felt a pang of sympathy. He had seen leaders crumble under the weight of such pressures, their ambition eating them alive. But he had no time for weakness, no room for it, in this delicate moment. "You've held this throne for a reason, Your Majesty," Elias said, his voice steady but laced with quiet determination. "And you're not going to lose it now. Not while we have a chance to fight back." Alira turned to face him fully, her eyes narrowing as if she were studying him for the first time. "And you think I need a human to help me?" Her voice was tinged with disbelief, but there was something else there, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just scorn, it was curiosity. "I think you need someone who understands what it means to fight for something greater than yourself," Elias replied. "I'm not here to take your throne. I'm here to help you keep it." She didn't speak immediately, and the silence between them grew heavier. Elias could see her mind working, weighing his words carefully, trying to decide if he was speaking the truth or simply trying to play her for a fool. He had never been more certain of his mission in his life. "You think my enemies will just fall away because you say a few words?" Alira finally asked, her voice sharp again. "You think that a human's empty promises are enough to sway them?" Elias shook his head slowly. "No, Your Majesty. I don't think words will do it. But actions speak louder than promises. We have the strength to fight back. We just need to show them that we're not afraid." Alira's expression softened for the briefest of moments before it hardened again, her eyes flickering with a flicker of something unreadable. "You've learned how to play the game of power quickly, Captain Stone. Perhaps too quickly." "I'm just getting started," Elias said quietly. "And so are you." Her gaze lingered on him for a long time, as though she were searching for something in him. He had no idea what it was. Maybe she was looking for weakness, or maybe she was looking for a sign that he could be trusted. All he knew was that this conversation was a turning point. The Queen had always seen herself as a force to be reckoned with. But now, in some strange way, he was becoming her equal. Not because of his strength, but because of the trust he was slowly earning. "I don't trust easily," Alira said finally, breaking the silence. "And I certainly don't trust humans. But there's something about you, Elias Stone. Something I can't ignore." Elias felt a rush of hope. This was the first time she had acknowledged him as more than just a pawn. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was starting to see him as a potential ally. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Elias said. "I'm asking you to let me help you. We both know that things are falling apart." "But we can fix it. Together." Alira's gaze lingered on him a moment longer before she spoke again. I will not let anyone take what is mine, she said, her voice cold with finality.
But if you think you can help me, then you will prove it. I will not accept failure.
I don't plan on failing, Elias replied firmly. Her lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. We shall see. The tension in the room didn't dissipate, but something had shifted. In that moment, Elias knew that they were on the same side, whether she fully acknowledged it or not. She might not trust him yet, but she had begun to see his value, and that was all he needed to push forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of covert meetings and quiet alliances. Elias worked tirelessly, using his human ingenuity to devise strategies that the alien factions never saw coming. He pushed for small victories, ones that would accumulate over time, building momentum. His knowledge of human history and tactics proved invaluable, and the more Alira saw him in action, the more she began to respect his approach. But her enemies were not idle. As the stakes grew higher, they began to close in on her, circling like sharks in the water. They didn't want just power. They wanted to strip Alira of everything she had worked for, to see her brought down in disgrace. Elias knew that their only chance was to outthink them, to be one step ahead, and that was where he excelled. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of talks, Alira summoned him once again. This time, when he entered her chambers, she didn't wait for pleasantries. She spoke immediately. "We're at a tipping point," she said, her voice laced with tension. "I've just learned that an assassination attempt is being planned. They're moving against me." Elias felt the familiar surge of determination rise in him. "We have to act quickly. What's your plan?" "I need you to help me devise one," she said. "We're running out of time." For the first time since they had met, Elias felt like he was truly working alongside her, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. The queen who had once called him weak now turned to him for guidance, and that, Elias thought, was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were nothing short of a battlefield, though it wasn't one that could be seen with the naked eye. The real fight was fought in the shadows, behind closed doors, in secret meetings, and through carefully crafted plans. Queen Elira's enemies were relentless, and their tactics were as brutal as they were calculated. But Elias was ready. He had learned how to navigate this kind of warfare, and it was becoming clear that his insights were not only useful, but necessary. Every day, Elira's once solid grip on her throne seemed to slip just a little more. The factions in the council were growing bolder, testing her resolve, pushing the boundaries of what they could get away with. But Elias had become more than just an advisor. He had become her right hand, the one person she could count on in this game of power. And she had learned to rely on him. It was late one evening when Elias found himself summoned to her private quarters once again. The night had fallen, and the stars outside the palace windows were obscured by the city's artificial lights. But Elias wasn't focused on the view. He had spent the last few hours reviewing intelligence reports, his mind constantly working, formulating new strategies to stay ahead of the ever-growing threat. He hadn't expected to sleep much tonight. There was too much at stake. When he entered her chambers, Alira was already waiting. She stood near the center of the room, her posture as regal as ever, but her expression was tight, strained, like she was holding something back. Elias noticed it immediately. For the first time since they'd met, she didn't exude the same unshakable confidence. "Elias," she greeted him softly, though her voice was far from weak. There was still power in it, but it had lost some of its edge. "Sit with me." He did as instructed, not questioning her, but still sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't about power.
For the first time, it felt like something more personal was at stake.
"I've heard from my spies," Alira continued, her eyes meeting his.
"They've found the traitors in my court. There are two of them. A high-ranking officer in the military and a trusted advisor to my most loyal generals.
They've been conspiring with the rebels, planning a coup." Elias felt the weight of her words. The stakes were higher than ever, If Elira's inner circle had been compromised, the very foundation of her reign was at risk. A coup wasn't just about losing power. It was about losing everything: her life, her legacy, and everything she had worked for. So, what do we do? Elias asked, his voice low but steady. He wasn't afraid. Not now. He had come this far, and he would see it through. Elira took a slow breath, her gaze turning away from him for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable.
I've never been able to trust anyone, Elias. Not completely.
Not like this. It's always been about control, about maintaining my position. Elias wasn't surprised by her admission. He had seen the way she carried herself, always guarded, always calculating. It made sense that she would struggle with trust, but what he had also seen in her was a fierce determination, a desire to protect what was hers, and that, he believed, was something he could work with. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly. That's why I'm here. Her eyes locked onto his, the intensity of her gaze almost piercing.
And what do you expect me to do with that? You're a human.
You can't understand the weight of what's at stake. You don't know what it's like to rule an empire this old, this complex. Elias leaned forward slightly, meeting her challenge head on. I may not know what it's like to rule an empire, but I do know what it's like to fight for something that matters.
I know what it's like to stand against the odds and refuse to give up.
Elira didn't respond right away. The silence stretched on between them, heavy and thick. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was a silence that spoke volumes, the kind of silence that held the promise of understanding, even if that understanding hadn't fully been formed yet. Finally, Elira broke the silence with a single, quiet word.
Okay. It was all she said. But in that moment, Elias understood. She was ready to let him in, to truly let him help, to trust him with something more than just words.
For the first time, she saw him not as a human, weak and fragile, but as an ally, someone who could stand beside her, even when the rest of the galaxy thought she would fall. They spent the next few hours plotting their next move. They would act swiftly, decisively. Elias knew that they didn't have the luxury of time. The traitors in the court needed to be exposed before their plans could come to fruition. He could see the plan unfolding in his mind, moving pieces on a chessboard, anticipating every potential outcome. We'll need to move quickly, Elias said, his voice taking on a tone of quiet urgency. You'll need to confront them directly.
We can't afford any more secrets. Elira nodded, her expression grim but resolute.
And if they try to run, then we deal with them, Elias replied.
But first, we have to make sure we have the support of the people. They need to know that you're still in control.
Elira's eyes darkened.
They've never truly trusted me. Not fully.
They will, Elias said, his voice firm, but only if you show them that you're still the queen they believed in, that you're still the one who can lead them. The plan was set in motion. The next morning, the court was abuzz with activity. Elira made her way to the council chamber with Elias at her side, her every step deliberate, her presence commanding. The tension in the room was palpable as the various factions awaited her next move. But this time, Elias could see the difference in her. The fear that had lingered in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, unwavering confidence. Today, I will reveal the truth, Elira announced, her voice carrying through the room.
There are traitors in our midst. Those who have conspired against me will be held accountable.
The room erupted in gasps, the council members shifting uneasily in their seats. But Elira's gaze remained steady, unwavering. She wasn't just making an announcement. She was reclaiming her power. Elias could see the impact of her words. There were whispers, glances exchanged, and nervous shifting. But through it all, Elira stood firm. She wasn't just the queen who ruled with an iron fist anymore. She was the queen who had learned to trust, to allow others to help her shoulder the weight of her reign. It wasn't long before the traitors were revealed. Their names, once hidden behind the facade of loyalty, were exposed for all to see. The conspirators were swiftly dealt with, their plans thwarted before they could gain any real traction. The loyalty of the council was tested, but in the end, Illyra's resolve had proven stronger. In the aftermath, as the council began to settle, Illyra turned to Elias. Her expression softened, but her gaze filled with a newfound respect. "You were right," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "I couldn't do this alone." Elias met her gaze, his own respect for her growing. "You never had to." For the first time, the Queen and the human stood side by side, not as rulers and subordinates, but as equals. It was a moment of victory, not just for Illyra and Elias, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. They had proven themselves, not through strength or violence, but through trust, cooperation, and a shared determination to overcome the impossible. And as they left the council chamber together, Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the galaxy would always be filled with challenges, but they had proven that anything was possible when they stood together. The days following the coup attempt were filled with both relief and preparation. Queen Illyra had regained control of her throne, but the true test was yet to come. There were still remnants of the rebellion scattered throughout the empire, and the trust that had been shattered would take time to rebuild. However, Elias could see a change in the Queen. The steel in her eyes had softened, but only slightly. She was no longer just the ruler who demanded loyalty. She had become a leader who had earned it. They worked together in the days that followed, tirelessly planning for the future. The rebellion had been quelled, but the damage to Illyra's reputation was far from healed. She needed to show her people that she was strong enough to rule, and that she would not back down in the face of adversity. But more importantly, she needed to show them that she had changed. She had learned to trust, to rely on others, and that made all the difference. Illyra's efforts to regain the trust of her people began with a public address to the citizens of Xeris. It was time to confront the truth, to let them see her vulnerability, and to prove that she was still the leader they had once believed in. Elias stood by her side as she made her way to the podium, watching as she took her place before the crowd. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but it wasn't the cheers of loyal supporters that filled the air. It was the hushed silence, the uncertainty of what they might hear. "I have led you with strength," Illyra began, her voice steady, but there was something more to it now, an authenticity that hadn't been there before. "But strength alone cannot hold a kingdom together. I have made mistakes, and I have been blind to the needs of those I serve." The words struck a chord with the crowd. There were murmurs, low and uncertain at first, but as Illyra continued, her confidence began to shine through. "I have learned that no one is invincible, not even a queen. And I have learned that it is not enough to command loyalty through fear. It must be earned. I will earn your trust, Xeris. I will rebuild what I have lost, and I will do it with the help of those who stand by me." Elias watched as Illyra's words slowly began to shift the mood in the crowd. There was still doubt in some of their eyes, but there was also something else, a flicker of hope. It was a small spark, but it was enough. The Queen had opened her heart, and the people could see it. When she finished her speech, the crowd erupted into applause, though the cheers were more reserved than the loud shouts that had greeted her when she first took the throne. But it was progress, and for the first time, Elias saw the Queen for who she truly was. A ruler who had learned from her mistakes, who had embraced change, and who had the courage to show vulnerability. In the following weeks, they moved quickly to solidify their position. The loyal factions rallied around Illyra, and her enemies, those still lurking in the shadows, were no longer a threat. The Queen's resolve had proven stronger than the rebellion's efforts to tear her down. But even as she regained control, she knew that her work was far from done. There were still challenges ahead, still enemies to face, and still trust to rebuild. One evening, after a long day of strategy meetings, Elias found himself alone in his quarters. The sun had long since set, and the lights of Xeris were beginning to flicker in the distance. He had been reflecting on everything that had transpired, the battles, the betrayals, the risks they had taken. He had come to Xeris as a simple human, a representative of Earth. But now he had become something more. He had earned Elira's trust, and in doing so, he had earned the trust of the people. He had proven that humanity wasn't just a fleeting curiosity in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He stood and opened it, to find Elira standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Elias nodded, stepping aside to allow her in. "Of course." She entered the room and took a seat at the table, her posture straight but less rigid than it had been in the past. There was something different about her, something more open, more human.
"I've been thinking," Elira began, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "You've been by my side through everything, Elias. You've helped me in ways I never expected, and I need to know, how do you do it?" "Do what?" "Stay so calm," she said, her voice low. "You've been through more than any human should ever have to face, and yet you never waver."
You never doubt?
How do you do it?
Elias thought for a moment, his gaze falling to the floor as he searched for the right words.
It's not about never doubting. I've doubted more times than I can count.
But I've learned that doubt doesn't mean you give up. It means you fight harder, you push forward, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.
I've seen too many people give up when things got hard. I'm not one of those people.
Elira listened intently, her eyes never leaving him. For a moment, the weight of everything they had been through seemed to hang in the air between them, a shared understanding that needed no words.
You're more like us than I thought, Elira said softly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. More than just a human.
You're a survivor, Elias smiled in return.
I suppose we all are in our own way. The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind of silence that comes when two people have finally come to understand each other.
Alia had trusted him with her throne, with her empire, but more than that, she had trusted him with something far deeper.
She had trusted him with her vulnerability, her weakness, her humanity. And in return, he had shown her what it meant to trust someone else, to open up to them, and to fight alongside them. The door opened suddenly, and a messenger stepped inside, interrupting their moment of quiet. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, bowing quickly before addressing Elira.
"We've received word from the outer colonies. A new alliance has been formed. A strong one. They're requesting your support." Elira stood up, her posture straightening as she took control of the situation once more.
"We'll respond immediately," she said, her voice once again firm, filled with the authority that had always defined her. But Elias could see the change in her, the subtle shift in her demeanor. She was no longer just the queen who had been feared. She was a leader who had earned the respect of her people, and his. As the messenger left, Elira turned to Elias with a quiet smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, "for everything." Elias nodded, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything they had been through. "It's been an honor." And in that moment he knew that this wasn't just the end of their journey. It was the beginning of something new, a partnership, a friendship, and perhaps, in time, something even more. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together they would face whatever the future held. For the first time, Elias believed that humanity had a place in the galaxy, a real, meaningful place. And that, he thought, was just the beginning.